Hello, and welcome to another installment of There You Go with Bryan. The year was now 1966. The Evel Knievel stunt show had been traveling the country for almost a year. It was a ragtag group of very brave, if not half crazy men, such as Sweet Savage, Eddie Mulder, and Clutch Fargo. It would roll into a town and go to the nearest football stadium or baseball diamond and invite people to come watch the greatest stunt show in the world. The show would consist of speeding motorcycles, crashing through walls, set ablaze with fire and gasoline. There was one stunt in particular that was a crowd favorite. Bobby Knievel would stand on the pavement and have one of his friends ride their motorcycle at 80 miles an hour directly towards him. And at the last minute, if his timing was just right, he would be able to jump in the air and avoid being hit by the oncoming motorcycle. Most of the time it worked. The last time, it didn't. Bobby Knievel ended up with what he called a sprain of his entire lower body. Of course, the main event of each show was the great and fearless Evel Knievel, jumping over an ever-increasing amount of automobiles, and although the shows were successful, ultimately, they were losing money. It was in the summer of 1966 Bobby Knievel realized if he was going to be a major success, he would have to strike out on his own. He broke up the stunt show and went solo. He started jumping cars and trucks. This allowed him to jump a certain number of vehicles and then return to the same town and promise to add one more car to the new jump. It worked, as long as Knievel stayed healthy. But on June 19, 1966, in Missoula, Montana, he tried to jump 12 cars and a cargo van. The short distance to the takeoff ramp prevented him from getting to the proper speed, and he ended up coming down short on the van. He ended up with a severely broken arm and several broken ribs for his efforts. In subsequent jumps, he broke his left wrist, a right knee, and more ribs. In Graham, Washington, while jumping 15 cars, his head hit the pavement so hard that even though he was wearing a helmet, he received a concussion that left him sidelined for almost 2 months. But he was getting a lot of publicity. Bobby was very smart, and he knew he couldn't keep this up forever. What he needed most right now was a bigger audience. One of the biggest motorcycle races in the country was about to happen at Arizona's Ascot Speedway, and Evel knew it was going to be covered by ABC's Wide World of Sports. All he needed now was to figure out a way to put himself in the middle of it. By late February 1967, Evel Knievel had contacted the owner of the speedway and told him that he would set up his own ramps and jump over 15 vehicles, and he wouldn't take a penny over $1,500 to do it. The morning of March 5, 1967, Evel Knievel made his national debut. When ABC's Wide World of Sports heard that a maniac was going to kill himself trying to jump over 15 cars while riding a motorcycle, they couldn't resist. They offered him a brief interview on camera, and the rest was up to Evel. You can tell by just seeing him in his pre-jump interview. He was filled with confidence. There was no fear, and he was fully committed to the task at hand. At the time, he was riding a Triumph Bonneville T120 motorcycle with a 650cc engine. He revved the bike, and after just one test pass on the ramp, he opened up the clutch, rolled the throttle, and took off like a rocket towards a destiny that he believed was his birthright. 3,000 spectators were spellbound as they watched the young man from Butte, Montana, clad in a form-fitting black and yellow leather jumpsuit, racing towards the launch ramp. Before taking off, nobody knew Bobby Knievel, but after a perfect jump and landing on the other side, everyone around the world had been introduced to Evel Knievel. The problem with getting a little bit of fame is it leaves you wanting for more. After appearing on ABC's Wide World of Sports, Evel Knievel knew that he would have to come up with something big, very big. November 17th, 1967, while in Las Vegas spending a weekend relaxing and enjoying watching Dick Tiger defend his light heavyweight boxing title, Evel Knievel believed that he had found that something big. He had gone into Caesar's Palace Hotel and Casino and had a drink. As he was looking through the picture windows of this newly built world-class five-star hotel, he couldn't help but think how spectacular it would be if he could somehow jump his motorcycle over the picturesque and expansive fountains in front of Caesar's Palace. He promptly jumped on the phone and made a call to the general manager of the hotel, Jay Sarno. When he reached him on the phone,
Hello?
He told him he was a reporter for Sports Illustrated. He asked Sarno if he had heard anything about this Evel Knievel guy who was going to be jumping the fountains at his hotel. The busy executive slammed down the phone. A day later, Knievel called back with a different name and said he was from Time magazine, asking the same question. He continued this routine for over a week, changing his name and voice to confuse the executive, supplemented by also reaching out to local TV and radio stations, asking them when the big event was going to take place. Eventually, people started to think that it was real. The last time Evel Knievel called Sarno, he told him that he was indeed Evel Knievel. The general manager was ecstatic and said, "I've been looking for you. Get to my office as soon as you can." Sarno thought this stunt was crazy, but he knew a good promotion when he saw one. He thought if this Evel Knievel kid was dumb enough to risk his life trying to jump 150 feet over his fountains, then Sarno was going to be smart enough to take him up on his offer. The date was set, December 31st, 1967. The morning of the jump, the tension was palpable. Over the course of 2 months, everyone had heard of the crazy daredevil who was going to take a motorcycle and jump across the fountains at Caesar's Palace. It would be comparable to jumping the width of a professional football field, if a professional football field had fountains spraying water 100 feet in the air. No one wanted to miss it. Had he finally bitten off more than he could chew? Was he really insane for risking his life like this? These questions will be answered soon enough, but it really didn't matter. Once he gave his word, there was no way he was ever going back on it. The morning of the jump, Bobby Knievel left his hotel room at Caesar's Palace, took the elevator downstairs. As he walked through the casino, there would be no more bluffing. He had spent every nickel he had promoting this jump. It was a long shot if he came up short. His life could end that very day in the desert of Nevada. But if he made it, he would be one of the biggest winners that the town ever saw. He was flat broke with the exception of a $100 chip that he stopped to place at a roulette wheel. When the wheel stopped, he came up a loser. He walked over to the bar, asked for a shot of wild turkey, threw it down his throat, and walked out the front door of the hotel, where he was met by 2 scantily clad showgirls. By now, Evel Knievel had taken to wearing all white leathers, highlighted with red, white, and blue stripes. Bad guys wear black, Evel said. He wanted to send a message that he was a good guy. Today would be the day that he would become a legend, or die trying. The Triumph motorcycle revved outside of Caesar's Palace. The crowd was tense, and everyone's stomach was in knots. There would be no practice runs for this jump. It was a narrow takeoff ramp, and you couldn't even see the other side of the fountains until it was too late. Evel's bike had no gauges on it. He would have to estimate his approach speed by the seat of his pants. Some had called him a con man. Some had called him a braggart. But as he said, when you go down that white line, a con man and a braggart ain't gonna get it. As everyone said a prayer, he took off. He hit the ramp at approximately 85 miles an hour. Later, he would say that as soon as he took off, he knew he was about 3 miles an hour too slow and slightly off axis. But this troublemaker kid from Butte, Montana, soared through the air like an eagle that day. It all lasted for less than a minute. As he approached the landing ramp, he came up short, The bike hit the ramp with such force that the handlebars were ripped out of his hands. The bike bucked violently against his body, throwing him over the top. Some people have said that it wasn't Evel Knievel's successful jumps that he was known for, but for the most horrific crashes ever seen. This would be the most horrific. It just so happened that Evel Knievel had become friends with a young filmmaker named John Derrick, who happened to be at Caesar's Palace that day with his young wife, Linda Evans. They had asked Evel before the jump if he wanted them to film him. He said sure, and the following footage became some of the most iconic in sports history. Upon landing on the other side of the fountains, and after surviving the initial impact of the crash, Evel's body appeared to disintegrate, turning and twisting in the most unnatural and disturbing ways possible. He shattered his wrist after flipping over the bike and hitting the pavement. For the first time, he broke both ankles. That was followed by a crushed pelvis that had met with the unforgiving pavement. Evel later said the only thing that saved his life that day was his specially made Harley-Davidson helmet. However, he still sustained a life-threatening concussion. His leathers were literally ripped to shreds, and when his body finally stopped scraping against the pavement, he had ended up in a heap in the Dunes parking lot next door to Caesar's Palace. The only thing in worse shape than Evel was his motorcycle that had flipped over a retaining wall and burst into flames. As the ambulance drivers lifted him onto the stretcher and slid him into the back of the ambulance, Evel, who was miraculously still conscious, glanced over to see two small children crossing their fingers over their hearts. What started out as just a promotional stunt to bring people to a Las Vegas hotel and gambling casino had turned into a bloody and horrific milestone in the world of sports and entertainment. Upon arriving at the hospital, doctors and nurses scrambled to save the young daredevil's life. Knievel's body had sustained tremendous damage, and while his injuries were excruciatingly painful, they were not life-threatening. The X-rays told the story. Evel Knievel, the promoter, embellished the rest. Rumors soon started to circulate around town that he was in a coma, hanging on to life by his fingernails. The truth was, from his hospital bed, he orchestrated a masterful PR stunt, putting out several press releases, stating that he might not make it. The healing of his bones and the rehabilitation took the better part of 6 months, but inexplicably, he recovered. And when he stepped out of the hospital, everyone wanted to interview Evel Knievel, the daredevil who cheated death. The story of Evel Knievel is a very unique one, for this was the first time in modern history that reality and fantasy would merge seamlessly. This unique, one-of-a-kind man who came out of the wilderness of Butte, Montana, would talk with such confidence, such braggadocio, that most people would say he was a liar or insane. But he would always back up his claims. Most of the things he said were true. Some things were more or less embellished. It was almost as if his entire life had started to become performance art. But if Bobby Knievel was starting to slip away, Evel Knievel was taking over.